How long do you need to train for your first marathon? It's a pretty simple question, but unfortunately, there's no one size fits all answer, which is exactly why I made this video. So whether you're a beginner coming off the couch or you might play a bit of footy on the weekends with your mates, I'm going to break it down so you know roughly how long it's going to take you to train for your first marathon. And importantly, not just survive it, but hopefully thrive within it as well. So let's get stuck into it. Unfortunately, you can't just wing a marathon on stuff all training, and I know people have done that and will continue to do that, but I feel like generally society has become desensitized to those who run marathons and even 50 to 100k ultra marathons as well. But make no mistake, running a marathon is bloody tough work. So if it's your first marathon, it's going to take you between, say, 3 to 6 hours of running to complete. And if you're running your first marathon in 3 hours, the chances are you're probably not a beginner runner. So, it's more likely going to take you between 3.5 to 6 hours. So, that's a long time for your body to be running continuously. So, when I'm talking about my running goals, or if I'm working through, what I want to achieve out of an event or a program, we always work backwards from the start, from the finishing line, when we're starting out. So, for a marathon, we're working backwards from that. You have to condition your body to run between, say, 3 to 6 hours. How do you do that? Well, it takes considerable development, a lot of low intensity running, a low to moderate intensity running, easy running, to condition your body to physically be able to sustain that journey. And there's also the development of our energy sources, or our utilization of energy, to become more efficient, because the important thing about a marathon is that it's not only the physical battle of your muscles being strong enough and resilient enough to last the 42.2, but it's also our usage of energy as well, and how we can try and avoid hitting the wall or prolonging that as much as possible. So both of those streams require low to moderate intensity running over months and months of training, which, depending on where you're at as a runner, may or may not take you 6 to 9 months just to get to that starting point. But I will concede that the body is definitely capable of more than what we think it is, and a shout out to all our David Goggins followers out there. But cutting corners in your training, unfortunately, just leads to one of probably 5 things, and that's injury, burnout, or ending the race in hospital. Generally, that's how it usually happens. And no matter how tough you are or how tough you think you are, if you put yourself in hospital due to circumstances within your control whilst running a marathon, then it's on you. Unfortunately, you need to respect the marathon distance and put work in to avoid those things happening. But ideally, you want your first marathon to be memorable. You don't want it to be memorable because you crawled across the finish line or your calf blew out. So this video is going to hopefully allow us to make it a memorable experience, and not one that was crowded in hospital visits or x-rays and MRIs after the fact. So I want to start with, okay, who are you as a runner? What's your profile as a runner who's running their first marathon? So the original question was, well, how long is it going to take you to train for your first marathon? And I said it's hard to answer, mainly because first-time marathoners generally fit into one of 3 different categories. One, you're a complete beginner, so you don't really have any recent running history. You're doing this to probably tick off a bucket list item. The second one is a recreational athlete, so you play sport, you're a gym goer, or you might be a casual runner already. And then the third one is you're an intermediate runner, so you might actually be running already, but you haven't done the marathon journey. You might have done 10K, a half marathon, but you never really stepped up to the full marathon journey. But importantly, they're all still, all these profiles are still in the same place, but they all need a different approach, and it mainly differs between the training phases I've determined for a marathon. And that's that there's a pre-training phase, which is basically developing your level of running competency to be able to then graduate into the main phase, which is being able to actually train for a marathon itself. So they're the 2 key distinctions and phases of training, which are going to dictate how long this process is going to be for you in actually successfully training for your first marathon. The first phase, I believe, is the pre-training phase. So this is where we build up our running ability by being able to achieve a set list of competencies, which I'll go through in a sec, which basically suggests to me that you can start training for a marathon. So The length of this pre-training phase is ultimately what sets different first marathoners apart. So this could be a 6-month journey just to establish or get to these list of competencies to then train for a marathon on top of that. But basically, we graduate this phase on milestones and reaching them rather than time. So you'll know you're ready to graduate this phase of pre-training when you can do most of the following list of competencies. The first one is, can you run 3 to 4 days a week on week, relatively injury-free? So when you're running a marathon, I don't think it's ideal that you would train for a marathon only be able to run 3 days. I think 4 is probably the bare minimum, just because your body needs to be strong enough to run continuously throughout the week. And then the next one is, can you run on back-to-back days? So again, for me, like, it's not necessarily that you need to run every run back-to-back, but as I've said previously, like, you probably need to aim to run for at least 4 days per week. So you're eventually going to have to run on back-to-back days. And I feel like if your body isn't strong enough to physically handle running on back-to-back days, then you're probably not ready to start training for a marathon just yet. Third point is can you run for at least 90 minutes non-stop? Now, I say 90 minutes because when I first started in the intro, a first-time marathon is going to take anywhere between 3 and 6 hours. So, you need to be able to run probably at least half of that continuously to be able to start, running or start training for your first marathon. So, if you're working from, okay, I've run a marathon just over 3 hours, like, I need to be able to run for at least 90 minutes to start training and building that up. So again, it's not that you can't stop training, it's just the actual dedicated marathon training block. But your body still needs to be strong enough to be able to start from at least 90 minutes, I'd recommend. Can you run for 30 to 50 Ks per week consistently? Now, again, these are arbitrary numbers and it will differ for different people, but you've got to remember a marathon's 42.2 kilometers. So if you can't run more than 30K in a week and you plan to run 42.2 on one day, it's pretty tough, to be honest. I'm not saying you can't do that, but you do ideally want to be building up so that your weekly volume is going to be longer than an individual session that you're ultimately going to run. So, if you can run between those two at the moment, that's really good, and that puts you on the right path to successfully train for the marathon. Next is, are you doing 2 lower body strength sessions a week? Now, again, I've put this in there because you want to be working on getting your body stronger in the gym. Now, running is ultimately the ultimate strength training for running, but gym or resistance training provides a different stimulus that's going to help your body become more resilient, stronger, and hopefully more durable against injuries. So that's a core competency I feel like most people need to try and incorporate. It's a pretty easy one to do. It doesn't take heaps. It could be a couple of half-an-hour sessions per week, but it's definitely vital for you to stay injury-free on what generally is it's a pretty tough and long process training for your first marathon. And the last one is, have you trained for a half marathon event or have you run a half marathon? Again, it's not compulsory, but it's just to give you an idea of how bloody far a marathon is. Like, after you've run 21.1, you'll get an appreciation of how long a marathon can actually go for. But all of this, so once you've graduated, you can tick off most of these points. This then leads into the main training phase, which I feel like is a little bit more consistent for the 3 different profiles that I've identified earlier. So irrespective of your ability, this is at least probably 16 to 24 weeks of training dedicated for a marathon. And even elite marathon runners or elite athletes will still, have training blocks this long to, try and get themselves cherry ripe for whatever their ultimate marathon is anyway. But this is the block where we begin to build up those long runs to 2.5 hours, somewhere in that region, and then ultimately up to 30 Ks plus. But let's dive into these profiles just a little bit more. So the complete beginner, you might be making a return to running after a very long hiatus, or you might just be starting your running journey from scratch initially. So if you're a complete beginner, I'm like, to start the path for you to get towards your first marathon, I'd work off the run-walk method. So basically, 3 times a week, I'd do run-walks or walk-run session where you'd run for a few minutes, walk for a few minutes, and then gradually build up that running and reducing the walking break. But I would do this continuously until I can run for, say, 30 minutes continuously, and then I'd start doing actual sessions. But the idea from this point is that you probably need to build up your training to at least 90 minutes and incorporate some strength, some gym work on the back of that, and then follow the rest of the marathon competencies. But for this profile or this starting point, the pre-training phase is probably the unknown variable here. And depending on your ability, you might need 6 to 12 months of getting your basic running competencies in order and strengthening your body to even begin to think about training for a marathon. So it's tough because some people might be faster in this process, some people might be slower, but the marathon and training for one, like, you need to go slow to be able to go far in this game. Otherwise you'll just burn out, particularly if you don't have that athletic base or the aerobic conditioning already established. Once you tick off these competencies though, you can begin to move into that 16 to 24 week period where you do some more specific marathon work. For the recreational athletes, so again, this is probably a little bit broad anyway, but you're already active, you probably play a team sport, and you would maybe run casually for fitness, and that's good, and it definitely gives you a leg up on a complete beginner in terms of your athletic development, but endurance running is still a different beast. So your pre-training phase here is most likely to be the big differentiator between how long this is going to take you, but you still might need a few months of basic running training to get yourself in a good spot to then begin training for a marathon. So it might be 6 to 9 months in total for a marathon training. Might be this, like you might do, say if it's 16 weeks, that's 4 months. It might be 2 to 3 months on top of that of getting your body sorted, establishing those competencies to then train in a specific marathon training block from there. But again, it really determines on how active you are and your running experience off the back of that. But again, your goal-based progression should still be the same, so you probably want to build up until you can tick off most of those competencies that we spoke about earlier. And then lastly is the runner itself, or the intermediate runner, or whatever level they're at, but they probably run consistently, probably 3 to 4 days a week. You're not an elite runner, but you've probably tackled most of the 5, 10Ks or even half marathons as well. So you probably just haven't tackled the marathon distance. However, like your pre-training period for the marathon is probably not going to be as great. Like you can probably tick off most of those competencies already, which means that you probably don't have to spend heaps of time just getting your body in order to then train for the marathon. But however, you still need to do at least 16 to 24 weeks. And I know some people will try and train for a marathon in 12, but again, it's cutting corners for me. Like I feel like if you want to do a marathon, and you need to do it properly and give it the respect it deserves and the respect you deserve as well. So I'd still work from that 16 to 24 week base. If you haven't reached those milestones to begin your marathon training, how do you train your body to get to that point? Well, specific marathon training isn't necessarily about running fast like a 5-kilometer event. It's becoming more durable, more resilient, and efficient to last the 42.2 kilometer journey. So any speed work on top of that is just the cherry on top. But we want to build a solid foundation where you can run efficiently for 3 to 6 hours. So what's going to do that is training to develop our aerobic energy system. So aerobic energy system is the key to any endurance running performance, basically from say 1500 meters up to the marathon. So this is underpinned by a lot of low to moderate intensity running, and that is the staple of building a solid aerobic energy system, which is going to essentially underpin the foundation of a successful marathon training block. Again, the best way to do it, low to easy moderate training, months of that, like it takes years upon years to actually successfully develop an aerobic base. And I know people will say that you only need about 6 to 12 weeks to develop your base, but that's a bit of a nonsense. Like you can do that for years on end and still get continuous improvement. But essentially what that might look like for your week is if you might run 4 days a week, it's a lot of low to moderate intensity sessions. It's building volume gradually as well. So the way we would do that, on the weekend we do a long run, either a Saturday or Sunday, probably a couple of easier runs during the week as well in terms of intensity, and then maybe one faster continuous run per week. That's a really good solid formula for you to try and develop your engine, get stronger, more durable in a sustainable way to then train or get into a marathon training block. With that development, we'll get better fat utilization as well. So when I spoke earlier about the marathon, I spoke about not just being physically strong, but we need to be strong, or more efficient is probably the better term, with energy, because the marathon is an energy game as well as it is a physical game. So if we can develop fat usage better, it means that we can avoid hitting the wall sooner as well, because we can use fats which are stored in more abundance than what our glycogen stores are anyway. And then generally we'll have a faster recovery, bodies get stronger, so we're more resilient, we recover quicker, greater running economy, become more efficient with the running that we're doing. And then just less chance of injury as well. As you get more durable and stronger, then you're less likely to get injured as well. So, but like anything, that's like building a house. So your aerobic energy system is basically the bricks and it's the foundation, and we build that year upon year eventually building, you know, a really solid aerobic system, which is going to underpin that marathon performance, and ultimately that formula will reap you rewards for years to come, basically. Okay, let's wrap this up. I've been yapping on about the marathon too much already, but hopefully you've got an idea as to how long it's roughly going to take you to train for your first marathon. But my golden rules are, you know, don't jump straight in. Like, let's build through the milestones that we spoke about earlier, because it's going to make you a more accomplished runner, a better runner, which, to be honest, if you're going to enjoy it more, you're more likely to come back and make it a lifelong habit. So that's imperative. You know, the base training is essential. So building that aerobic development through, you know, easy to moderate running at least, you know, 4 times a week, and build up to, you know, check off those milestones. And then the timelines themselves will vary. So as I said, complete beginners, it might be, you know, a good beginner might take them 6 months to train for a marathon, which I think is way too skinny anyway, but it's more likely going to be at least 9 to 12 months, and probably closer to 12 months if you're doing it properly and thoroughly as well. Now, it's hard because everybody still is very much different, but I'd say, you know, a minimum a year is what I'd suggest for you to be training for. The recreational runners, again, depends on how much experience you've had, how fit you are, all those different things, but you're at least looking at 6 months again, which is probably still skinny, and you're probably more likely to say that 9 to 12 month range as well. But, you know, probably 9 months you'd be safe. And then for the runners themselves, like, it probably just depends on, you know, what they've been doing previously in their running history. But again, you still need to be doing at least a 16 to 24 week block, and then there's maybe a month or two on top of that, depending on, you know, where you're at, what you've been doing, and whatnot on top of that. But in all honesty, there's no better feeling crossing the marathon finishing line, knowing that obviously you gave it all and you've crossed the finish line, but, you know, celebrating the work that you've put into getting there as well. So a lot of people in running will say that, you know, the race day is a celebration of the training that you've done. It's a victory lap. So, you know, it's the same with the marathon. Like, it's a substantial amount of work that you need to put in, and you're going to put in to be there and you know, to get through to the finish line. So be proud of that, and be proud of the work that you've taken in to get there, and essentially not taking shortcuts to just try and tick it off your bucket list. But, you know, please, if anything, don't be another TikTok horror story that I see where someone's ended up in the hospital, or, you know, they've become dehydrated, or their muscles are eating themselves, or whatnot. So please don't do that. Take your time. We want you to, you know, survive rather than thrive. But, you know, if this video has helped you, then, you know, give us a like, subscribe, and all that sort of stuff, and, you know, have plenty more content to come, particularly on the marathon. So thanks for tuning in. Make some strides, and we'll see you next time.